Yay!
Yeah, come on.
Woo, 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 woo.
Hi.
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 Hi. Look at that cute bag. Hey everybody, just a casual, no pressure. If it makes people feel better, I walked in here and I was like, what? Those are fancy lights.
Hi, we're at David Rockwell's studio, and welcome to the American Theater Wing's Design Workshop with me, Clint Ramos, and David Sid.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us. When did we actually meet, Clint Ramos?
So you were doing a show at the American Repertory Theater, and you were like, hey, I need help swatching the show. And I was like, hey, I'm around, you know. And I swatched that show, and I think it was Island of Slaves.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is like an amazing show. You should Google it. It's like, and then we started. The first time we worked together was you did the scene and I did the costumes on Taming of the Shrew at the Dallas Theater Center. It was Richard Hamburger's last show.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it was a lot of fun.
I'm a huge admirer of Clint's. I
Same.
was then, I remain to be a huge, inspired all the time.
Yeah, no, it's funny because like I think when we talk about like journeys in the theater, like I think a lot of designers don't really get to spend a lot of time with each other, right? Because like I think we're also it's a quixotic lifestyle, right? Like we and it's very itinerant. We travel from one place to the other. But I think what the pandemic has created was like an environment where we all kind of really got to know each other, and and has sort of like it's given us sort of the gift of like really figuring out what's important and how we want to sort of make it better, you know what I mean? And so I think it's been a gift. It's been a gift knowing Zen for a long time, but also really like intently in these last 2 years.
How did you come to theater design, Clint Ramos?
So, oh my God. So I'm an immigrant. I was born and raised in the Philippines, but my background was political street theater. When I was growing up, the Philippines was really under a lot of like political unrest, and I met a drama teacher who said, I was in boarding school in high school, and he said, hey, I was like 11 or 12, and he was like, hey, do you want to, come with me to this thing that I'm doing? And it was basically a protest, and my first job was to hold this giant bamboo pole with a red flag, and it was literally, we would go to like town squares or like business centers, and that red flag would signal to folks that there would be a little pop-up performance happening there, right? And so, and these pop-up performances were like 10 to 12 minutes long, and it needed to be that short because if it went longer, the police would come with water cannons and disperse us, right? And so there would be a timer. But my job was to hold that thing, and people would gather, and there would be these like really thinly veiled allegorical pieces about the government, particularly about the Marcoses during that time. And I fell in love with theater. I was like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like it. Like here's like a thing that's happening and I can be involved in, and people are like changed, and then it cemented itself like there was a revolution that happened 3 years later, and I just fell in love. And I didn't think I would be a designer. I thought I would be like a director or something, I didn't have that skill. I didn't have that skill of like talking to actors and always being on, I think what I love about design is you can still have like a big picture kind of control over the worlds, but then also recede into your own internal world and be in the studio, and so it's both private and public. I like that very much, so that's how I got into design. And then I came to America and I went to grad school at NYU, where you went to school too. And yeah, how did you?
I was a little actor, musical theater nerd, loved musicals, thought I wanted to sing and dance, thought I could sing and dance, and I loved improvisation. Yeah. It was like everyone's worst actor nightmare. And but I think I mercifully had a family that you know, was okay with me doing that and nurtured my interest in that. But I think, and I started to do it quite young. I was interested in it really young, and I started to do it young. And I there was a point at which I was like, I was on stage, and I was like, this is not as cool as like, I'm not comfortable here. Like, I like being in the building, but like, this is not great for me. And I don't love all the people watching me, but I love being in the room helping to make the thing happen. And I remember getting, you know, the way I sort of remember it is like, you know, you sort of see backstage from being on stage, and you're like, ooh, what's that? Like, what's the like dark blue thing over there? And so I turned my attention to that, and never left, really. I mean, I love. So you expressed it so beautifully. I love, we have those moments where we overlap with the public and the performance, and we have to be on, but then we can retreat to the studio and kind of live in our brains, which is sort of,
it's my favorite thing.
My lesson from Clint always, and his work, and from the work that I admire, even if the passion, you know, passion doesn't always have to be fiery. It can be stately or stoic, but bring your passion, your own passion, to the work. Make a vessel which is like, you know, can vibrate with that passion and the passion of all the other, as you beautifully say, souls. That's the goal, and then and sometimes it happens. And sometimes
exactly. And but that's always that's the thing you have to shoot for, right? Like you just shoot for that, like the impossible, that sort of northern star, and you're just like, and you know what? If it falls flat, the many times that it fell flat, but you shoot for that. You literally just say, I'm gonna do this. Like this is, they're gonna walk in and it's gonna be like this, or that costume is gonna walk out and it's gonna be like, it's gonna be pow, right? And sometimes it falls, and sometimes it's extra, and sometimes, but you know, you attempted something that is passionate, like, and that's really, to me, that's what excites me about theater design. That because that thing is infinite. The possibilities of that is infinite.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shatoya, but everyone calls me Toya. I am from the Caribbean. I was born and raised in St. Lucia, and 5 years ago I moved here. I have a background in dance. That's where it all started. So from the age of 7, my mom was a teacher at the school, and I used to get bored when she had a meeting. So I'm like, I'm just going to walk into this class and start dancing. And so I did. And when I moved here, I wanted to do more dance, but I'm like, I feel like I know enough here. I want to stretch my hands into other places. So I went into theater, and I tried costume. Much respect to your costume designers. I don't know how y'all do it. I tried costumes, lighting, sound, and when I got to scenic, it just felt so natural. Like I felt like a baby playing again. Like I just didn't want to leave the studio. And I'm like, okay, let me explore that a little more. So the pandemic happened, and the shows that I had to design couldn't get designed. So I'm like, okay, I don't feel like I have enough information. I don't have enough education. I need to further that. So I decided to apply to schools. 38 schools were interested, and I chose the University of Maryland. And I am the first Black student at the University of Maryland.
Woo, baby!
Yeah. And I know being a Black woman in a white man's world and in America is difficult, but I'm pushing through. And my biggest thing is to go back to St. Lucia and to create my own theater to help those that are there that do not have the education or the opportunities to create it for them. So there's this workshop that I do every year, where it's called the Show Experience, where I bring international dancers to St. Lucia. They teach their dance genre, their specified dance genre, and we teach them a St. Lucian folk traditional piece. And it's just that cultural exchange, that network building, and giving back. Like, these are my values, and that's how I'm here.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Are you a first-year student?
Yes.
You're a first-year MFA student. Oh, great, wonderful, welcome.
Yeah.
And we can't wait to see what you have.
I can't wait to share.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Hi, Miguel.
Hello. Hi. Hi, my name is Miguel Urbino. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am currently a third-year MFA design student at the School of Drama at Yale. And I'm from the Philippines. I was born and half raised there. Didn't really have theater growing up, at least, like in the first 10 years of my life. My family migrated here in 2004, actually like 18 years ago last weekend.
Wow.
And I didn't really know any theater until I moved to this country. So very much the American theater is what I was seeing. Like there was nothing really that there was always an interest to want to tell stories, but really didn't know how to channel that. Was in musical theater in high school, and I found myself focusing more on how things looked, rather than what I was doing in it. Like I was a performer, but I was like, I hate the way that this prop looks. This prop needs to be better, so I will go home.
You were one of those performers.
Yes, I was. Oh, I know. So, looking back, I'm like, okay, so I get it now. But, in high school, it's a very different world. And I would always rather curate my own costumes. I would like to make sure that all the props look a certain way before, all of, looking into research and all of that stuff. And that's when I learned maybe design is for me. I think a huge part of that was also I learned very early in my life that performance wasn't a viable option because of the country and the world that we live in. And there was a moment where I had to do one last show, and I was already an undergrad for design, and I did a production of West Side Story where I obviously played a shark. Right. And we reached opening night, and I hated everything. I was like, this is not actually what I want to do. And I'm really glad that I had this one last moment where I finally knew that design was what I wanted to. I wanted to build worlds. I wanted to tell story. There was a joy in that I am not finding, at least in my experiences of being on stage. After what I know now, I've realized was a traumatic and also very abusive relationship with my job. I felt like I was no longer growing. I felt like I was stuck, even though I felt like I was in a place where I thought I was supposed to be assisting. And after one moment where I had a breakdown in the bathroom in the office, I walked out and I was like, I think I'm ready to go to grad school. It was something I've always wanted to do, and I didn't feel ready until that very moment. And I started applying to grad schools, and here we are. I felt like what I learned in that moment of just hitting rock bottom, I felt I was like, oh, I need to value a voice more, my own voice. And I felt like I was in a place where that was not really happening, and I needed to find a place where I could hone that into my work.
Well, we can't wait to see what you have. Hi, Jason.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Jason Goodwin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently an undergrad at NYU. I'm 3 more weeks until I graduate.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. I'm happy to be here. I'm from Virginia originally. There I kind of honestly from early on, I had very early memories of just kind of dragging my family into the theater to watch me do whatever sort of performance I had going on that day. And so, like David, my sort of intro into theater design was through performance. I was kind of resistant and biased towards the design. I kind of didn't want to love it as much as I was enjoying it, just because I was like, this is supposed to be my one thing. But as I continued doing it, I realized that it really is just a mosh posh of all of my favorite things that I enjoy doing, like the research, and like you were saying, Clint, like every project brings something different, and you learn about a new world, you get to create a new world, you get to learn about a new period in history or a new movement that I had never heard of, and just sort of get to create this world and use my artistic things that I used to enjoy doing and still do a little bit of performance because you're still doing a lot of like character work and whatnot. So yeah, so design is incredibly exciting, and so that's how I kind of got into it.
Welcome.
Awesome. Welcome indeed.
Hi, Zhang Yu.
My name is Zhang Yu. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a third-year costume design MFA student at Carnegie Mellon University. But I'm an international student. Originally, I'm from Shanghai, China. How can I get started into the theater? I remember when I was young, I always like drawing. So my parents got nothing to do, just give me a pencil and a piece of paper and you just play with yourself. And this is how I developed the hobby of drawing and painting, and this become my whole life hobby till now. And before coming to America, I have been working as a costume designer for years, and I feel that the more production I have done, I got to know this world a little bit more. And this is make me really excited and keep me being energetic and passionate about this industry. And when my experience got accumulated and the more my career developed, the desire for me to understand and to get to know other cultures and people who work in other countries in the similar industry becomes stronger and stronger. And this eventually made me make this decision to come to America and to see how people here understand the theater and do things. And this is kind of like how I ended up here, and I was accepted by CMU. So.
Great.
My name is Charles. I am a junior undergrad at Fordham University, thanks to Clint. And so I think similarly to everyone here, we started theater as performers mostly. And for me, I've always wanted to do performance, but I never really got the chance to until high school. And, you know, I mean, I loved it. I really did. But I think as I started thinking about the characters that I was portraying on stage and like how the elements that I used or that I wore helped me tell that story, it made me think about how I wanted to present myself as a person. And that segue from performance into sort of like performance in real life, and how, like, you know, it's so fascinating to me how you make judgments about people on the spot when you see them on the streets based off of what they wear, the way they move, the way they talk. And so that kind of segued me into costume design, which I'm now studying. And it just intrigued me on how like different styles and like different shapes made people move in certain ways and therefore inform the audience about the characters. And it was like a challenge to me of just like, how much can I discover about this? Like, I felt like not only could this be applied to theater, but also in real life, which, you know, theater can mimic and or replicate. And so I felt like there was just a treasure trove of information about how people can present themselves and how I can discover ways to present myself in ways that I didn't before. And so, yeah, and that's why I'm in costume design.
Well, welcome, Charles.
Yeah,
Hi, Jordan.
Oh my God, all the eyes are on me. Hi, my name is Jordan Miller. I am currently the Black Theater Coalition's Fellow for Scenic Design. So I'm working for Derek McLean until June, and then I work for Scott Pask from June to December. I currently hold my BFA from the University of Rhode Island in Directing, Stage Management, and Scenic Design.
Come on.
Growing up, you could not tell me that I would be doing scenic design for the rest of my life. I never paid attention in my art classes. I never drew because all of my drawings were just stick figures. I was like, I can't do this. I started out as a performer like everyone else. Funny enough, the story of that, my high school, I went to a small, primarily white Catholic high school, and they wanted to do hairspray. So naturally, they needed people to be in Seaweed's ensemble, so they pestered me beyond belief to like audition for the show. And I can't really tell you exactly why I'm still in the theater other than it just felt correct. It was the first time in my life at 13 where I walked into a room and I felt like I belonged. And that was a feeling, not knowing how that felt, feeling that for the first time made me knew I really didn't need to be anywhere else. So I kept on the performing track. Everyone told me I was so good at it, but my heart wasn't in it. But my heart was in theater. And when I got to college, I took some intro to design classes, and much like you, I went through costumes, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. I went through lights. I was like, this really doesn't make sense. I don't even want to talk about sound design. But scenic just, again, I can't tell you an exact thing about scenic design. It's a feeling. It feels correct. It feels right. And when I do it, I feel alive in ways that not really many other things in life can give me. So I knew this was the thing for me, and I knew I had to work hard to catch up to everyone else because I had found it so late. So that's really been my thing, fresh off of graduating in a pandemic, is just catching up my skills to where they need to be and just continuing to nourish that feeling of like, I belong doing this here. This activity is what makes me feel alive, and I need to continue to feed that. So,
Welcome. And you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing the do.
Somehow, some way.
So we're going to look at Toya's set model and set design for Echo, an Echo in the Bone. Toya, as you know, is a first-year MFA student at University of Maryland in College Park.
Yes.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you. So, An Echo in the Bone, written by Dennis Scott. It is a play that takes place in Jamaica, and it speaks about, like, the entire story speaks about how slavery has affected people before us, our ancestors, and it still affects us today. So it's like going in this loop of how this mental trauma and physical trauma is still affecting people today, Black people today. So this is literally from the script. It says that the action takes place in so many places. So, so many places. So we start off in 1792 in Africa. On the coast of Africa, there's a slave ship. So we get introduced to how the enslaved were taken from their homes, taken from their families, and basically brought onto a ship that they did not ask for and brought to America. It speaks about, we also go to 1820, where they sell enslaved people. Trigger warning, there are some images in my research that might be a bit too much. If you need to take a step back, feel free. I know this is a very touchy topic. We also go through Cru's house, and Cru is the main actor of the play, but we never see him. So it's basically, what had happened was, Cru didn't come home, and his wife knew that something bad happened to him. So there's word going around that Cru killed Mr. Charles, who's a white man, and Cru is Black. And we're not sure until the end, like, that question is answered. But while everyone is mourning Crew because they believe he is dead, there's this wake that Caribbean people call a 9 night. So for 9 nights, we speak about all the good and the bad stories of this person. We celebrate their life. We drink coffee. There's some smoking of ganja involved. And it's a very community event. The windows and doors are always kept open because we want the soul to leave freely. So that's a 9 night ritual. Starting off my research about how I want to tackle this play, bless you, is I want to take it from the 1782. I want to take it from the enslaved. And in these images, like, there's confusion here, which I kind of like, because you see that Black people are being enslaved, and there are also Black people enslaving Black people, which also goes into this whole slavery is not just white on Black, it's also Black on Black. There's colorism as well involved. This image I pulled up because I love that there's a sense of hope in the play, and there's this sense of freedom that everybody's looking forward to. And it takes place in a sugar barn in the Caribbean. And I'm looking at basically like how wood interacts with wood, and in the Caribbean, how like galvanized material is used as the roof. Next slide. And looking inside of that barn, what it would probably look like, the diagonals and the horizontals of the wood, and how the light can go through this to create more movement. And there's this thing about like spirituality in this play, and I kind of like how in this image it looks like a chapel, and in this one too, like that connection here. So I was also playing with that. Looking at slave houses in America and how I could fuse those two together, knowing that it is a Caribbean play, but it is for the American audience as well, how I could fuse those two together. The images after this are going to get harder, but we're going to get through it together, okay? For this one, it's basically like a cut of how the enslaved were brought to wherever they were going. And just being down there, literally crawled up for weeks, not seeing any light. And there are people who are sick next to you. There are people that you do not know, that do not speak your native language, like just understanding what it could be in that situation. And also looking at the architecture of that ship and how the light could come through those grates at the top. And playing with levels. We are in 1782, we were in the slave ship, so I'm looking at how I could transform this space into a slave ship as well, but keeping it a sugar barn. I want that slave ship to be like, oh, we didn't know that was there. So in this design, I included a deck. I included a trapdoor that reveals the slave ship, like the cargo hold. And then it disappears. So that light is constantly there throughout. And again, it's for the lighting designer to use as he or she wishes. But to just make that the presence of that 1782 where it all started.
And is the sense, is the sense that that is present, the light is sort of always present, so you're always aware that there's like a space underneath?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you. And this is another hint of hope. This is a painting that shows that there was a moment in history where the slaves took over a slave ship and they killed all of the men on there. And just, again, using that image just for hope. And how like the painter used his lines, I just really enjoyed. Next slide. And here we go into how sugarcane was like manufactured and how these shapes can be used into the sugar barn architecture, and how I could use the things that enslave the people. For example, this image down here is a torture device that if they did something bad, they would be punished by continuously walking on something like this. Another torture device, which is, you could see what it obviously does, and how I could use all of this in here, like little like Easter eggs. So now I'm using all my research and I'm creating like a Photoshop document that just gives me a feeling of something.
Right. So you're collaging all of these elements.
Yes.
Right?
Again, looking at the lines and how the lines and the levels and the light, and that bird in the corner there is like the symbol of hope. Again.
Victoria,
Yes.
I really like. Also, you're doing something which to me just feels really familiar, which is in a good way, which is that especially for places that take place in a zillion locations, of like just starting to map the commonalities. What do those places have? Like, what's the essence of those places? What do they have? What's a ship and a barn and a house and a, you know, what do the windows look like? Where are the windows? What does hope look like in these pictures? Like trying to kind of map those commonalities and make and let your research take you to the kind of collage, which is really, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's really great. And it's obviously a rich. You have a rich palette of commonalities in this, which is you're using really beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Here you have the enslaved in a cargo and the white man reaching down. And in, like, you might not see it right here, but some of them are like, oh my God, no, I don't want you to touch me. And someone else is like, help me. Because in that situation, like, you don't know how to trust that person. Yeah. And here I have a family escaping, and really subtly that image of like mental slavery.
It's kind of I think what's great about this is like this is the stuff that never gets seen, right, by directors. Or I mean, a director could see it, but like, you know, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what ultimately lands on stage. But I think I do this a lot because it plots the sort of visual trajectory of what I'm thinking, you know, and it's just, I think it's a good exercise to just keep your brain kind of like moving around these pieces. So yeah, no, I'm thank you for showing this, because I think it's really, you know, a lot of designers actually do this and we never see it. You know?
I wanted to ensure that I kept the space open. When an audience member comes in, they feel like they can go on stage into this 9-night week with the cast. So just looking at how I could merge these two.
Yeah.
Next. And in here is so this is a neutral model, by the way. White neutral model. Since we go so many places, a lot of the pieces on this side and this side will be used as tables, chairs. They will be like interactive.
I see the sort of the glowing embers down there. Yeah. Could we look at your model?
Yes, feel free.
Yeah.
Feel
Beautiful
free to
work.
look at it.
Great
Thank
work.
you. Thank you. And my idea with like the broken pieces of wood is like how it's very difficult for Black people to track back their ancestry, because so many times it's just like a blank statement, because we don't know who was there because we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like that piece of wood going up and just cracking.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's impossible to complete the structure.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I as it just aesthetically, like I like a finished structure. Do you know what I mean? I feel like when you're going to make a room. But there's something beautiful about not ever being able to finish the room. Feels like in this case such a gorgeous gesture. I have it's a beautiful project. I also literally can't believe that you're like, and then I thought I'd try set design. Crunk. Like, no, seems to agree with you. Can you talk a little bit? Is the 9 Nights Festival? What I see, this is where I'm going with this, which is, it's beautiful, and I think it's really smart, and I think for me, you've distilled all that imagery. What I see is a really hard line between what the play and the audience. And when I hear you talk about the piece, it sounds like something in which maybe the audience and the performance, like maybe there's an opportunity for connecting them a little bit. And so I don't know if that's not interesting to you, then like that's not interesting. But because it sort of circles around this 9 Nights Festival, and you're talking about you're showing these pictures of, you know, a group of people who experienced something together, and you're talking about a group of people on stage who are experiencing a story together. I wonder if there's an opportunity at some point, not on this project, maybe when you think about another one, to think, I see you starting to break past the proscenium here, but because you're doing a project at school and money's no object, and you know you can kind of do anything to the, you know, it's like you don't have to be bound by the proscenium. I wonder if there's a way, especially because you come from a movement background and a place where community is shared, there's a way to think about linking, just linking the event, right? We're all, whether there's a proscenium there or not, we're all in the same room, right? Witnessing a story, and maybe it's not the right thing to do, but it feels like a piece that maybe is worth exploring how this world extends into the audience.
I never thought of the world scenically going through the audience like that, and that's something definitely I would love to explore. The way I was looking at it from another lens was for the 9-night ritual, they drink a lot of coffee. There's a lot of like sage burning. So I was thinking of when the audience, they come in, they get offered coffee, they smell that sage burning, and it's like they're already in this atmosphere.
Great.
So I was thinking, but that's a great idea.
I love that, and I just, as a theater goer, I like that, and it feels like it's germane to what's happening in the play, which is that we've gathered to have this celebration, and that's always what's happening when you go see a play. It happens at Moulin Rouge, it happens wherever, but here it feels really like the subject of the play, which is we're gathered to have this, you know, this celebration, this wake for this person, and everybody in the room is going to learn this journey at the same time. So I feel anything you can do to sort of like bring us dream about, especially at school, where again, like no one's like, there's not a person who's like, who's gonna, build, you can't tear out those seats. Yeah, exactly. Just tear out the seats and put tables there, or do whatever, you know what I mean? My other thought, not to just while I'm standing here, is those images that you have, especially of the slave ship and stuff, and in the barracks, which are so awful, and you are suggesting, right, with the kind of cargo hold underneath. I just wonder, you have this plane, there's part of me that just wonders if you can also, because you don't really see that unless you're up high enough to see that if you raised up this stage a little bit, so that also from the front, maybe you don't see people, but you just see the potential for there to be a person under there, or the light comes out the front also, that you're just using all the planes that you have to help tell your story. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean because I sketched it. That was Deepa's idea.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Actually, let me just pull it up. Wrong direction. So, I could show everyone. So I started off with like thumbnails of like lines and how I could use the space. And then that's why I got the idea of using hair. So I actually wanted to showcase like people actually hair underneath. But yeah. So
this is such a beautiful drawing.
Thank you. And then it went from this into this. Into that.
Yeah, beautiful.
Where are you in this? Where are you in the journey of this
project?
The project? Is it done?
It's basically done. I just need to work on the props, like the torture devices I spoke about. I want to include some of that in there. Yeah. But that's basically it. Probably go over to some wood tones. Yeah. But that's basically it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love it. I think that this idea of like, I think the 9 Nights festival or the 9 Nights ritual is based on this theory that the soul is still earthbound in those first 9 days, right? And you leave the house porous. I think we have something very similar. I think in different cultures, you know. And so you leave the space porous for the soul to depart, right? And I think I understand that really well in this structure. I'm also curious about how you're using this sort of like, I love this background that you have, you know, and how that can transform, you know. In a way, the thing that kind of like keeps, I'm looking at it in a way, a lot of what I'm reacting to is sort of this, it's really a question, right? Like how, in those moments in the play where you track the sort of oppressive quality of it, I'm curious how you're gonna get to that, right? Because right now everything is going up, and there doesn't seem to be something pressing down. It's like you wanna feel that, and maybe that happens through lighting. I think this is something that you just probably need to like think about, right? And a lot of the play requires you know, a lot of locations, and I think one of the things that is always one of the hardest things, right, is to figure out what the set is, particularly when you have a lot of locations, right? And we'll go to your show and you'll see what we mean. But like, I think there's also something that's really magical about locating the play in a specific place, and really the challenge then becomes how to tell the narrative in the specificity of that place, right? So I think to me what was exciting about, it's a sugar barn, like can I does it need to be identifiably a sugar barn, right? Like, does it need to be more specific, right? So it transports us that way. Because I know what Zin is talking about, like let's experience it, let's open it up, right? Because I think one of the things that maybe if you produce this, one of the things that you have to think about, right, is like sort of, how do we experience the design? Is it a novelty? Is like, are people coming in there? You probably know what the audience makeup is, right? Are they looking at this as a piece of exotic something, right? Like, is this something? Or, as Zin said, is it experiential, right? But then, in the first option where they're looking at it as a thing, as a novelty, as a something, right? Then do we actually then give them, is that the entry into the play? Is the design the entry into it, right? So is it more specific? Like, is it truly a sugar barn, right? Like, and we see the functioning of the mechanism of that, right? Because that is the industry that's really oppressing them, right? So these are all just questions, you know. I think one of the things that I really, really, really love about the design is the possibility of transformation through lighting, you know, because I don't. No. Maybe the camera can like look. I think one of the things.
Yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to do.
Is you can look at what the shadows of that, and if you have like even a moving light situation, you can get them to, you know, pow, and then imagine what Zin was talking about, which was like, imagine that extending into the audience and you're seeing the slats of light in people's faces, you know. I think part of this too, you know, this happened with Slave Play when I did it on Broadway. I think the important thing is not to make it, is to make a decision about how much you're actually indicting the audience, right? Inevitably, when you deal with race in America, it's almost, for me, I think, as a theater practitioner, it's almost a responsibility, right, to have a level of indictment, to have a level of awareness of the complicity that we have towards this system, you know, and that's to me what's magical about doing shows like this, is because there's, you know, there's possibility to sort of like tickle the machines of change. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. But amazing, bravo.
This right here, I was thinking of it moving slightly forward and the sides dropping down into a T for the slave ship as well. So it's like there's this big transformation of the space with sound, lighting, and we just see this thing falling over. So maybe that could tap into the whole something feeling oppressive, but I don't think that is strong enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's sometimes when we want a big gesture, sometimes we use like a little thing to stand in for the big thing, and I would say do the big thing. Like I do, your instinct about
Yeah.
like maybe that's not enough. I'm like, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think it's enough.
That's right. That's right. You already have it in a way.
Yeah.
There's this kind of like it reminds me of Michael Jurgen's set model for Barbara of Seville, or his design for Barbara of Seville, where there was a giant anvil in the sky, right? Like, and you already have this element of like something actually that's teetering. I think what's great about what is that? What is that? What is that? What is this like chunk of like? What is that?
This thingy that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, no,
doing?
but what is that cube?
It's like if this was conjoined in that architecture of the sugar barn
Yeah.
and they broke off. So it's like
But
just
what is that thing that's hanging?
oh, the cube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like cargo.
Gotcha.
Oh, and
Cargo.
at the end, there's so many pieces to this
Right,
thing.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And but I think what's great about it is like it gives us a window of precariousness and
Yeah.
danger, right? And I think that's sort of like
Yeah.
what my it's like, is there anything?
Where's the danger, right?
Where's the danger,
That's
right?
smart.
And maybe that's something that you can sort of just run with, right? Like does the cube need to be bigger?
Yeah, I was gonna say the cube bigger or the thing just like a little, like really looks like it's gonna fall.
Fall.
Right now it looks like it's supported
Yeah.
nicely, so it hangs in your model. But I wonder if it should, again,
Angled more.
yeah, just feel
Yeah.
like, ooh, that thing is gonna fall.
Yeah.
Like, oh
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
Like that feeling all the way through, and it, it lowers, or there's another one, or the shadow from it becomes
Yeah.
a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing I'll say, just also because you're a dancer and a choreographer and a person who moves people, is I want to see all the people in your. Like I actually also want to see. I want to see how you move, how you bring that movement of people into this. Is there a picture where they're all huddled up against the corner? They're all against the front. Like how do people move in this space? Because I also think you'll start to be like, ooh, there's a line of people. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a thing like smushing them down?
Yeah.
You're gonna start to learn about the scenery by moving your little model figures around. And I especially as someone who moves people and is a mover, like also, I mean, I have to say it's a beautiful set, and it's great, and all of these are just inspiration from how beautiful the work is that you brought in. But also bring your other skill, right?
Yeah,
Which is the movement of people,
Yeah,
for sure. And
yeah,
here, I think it
yeah.
will tell you a lot about how the space moves.
Yeah, it's really those are the questions, right? Like how does it become really transformatively ugly, right?
Yeah.
Like I think because there are things that are just like really ugly about this play, and I think part of like really the sort of trap of elegiac plays, which this is one, and if you want to look at, for instance, For Color Girls, which is on Broadway right now, I think that the key to me always about that is like not to fall into the poetry of it, right? Because it could be lulling, right? And I think as a designer and as a design, you want to give opportunities for both the movement, the language, and everything to bump up against, something. So yeah.
Beautiful work.
Yeah, beautiful work.
Yeah, Miguel Urbino is showing us Soft Power, a musical written by Janita Sori and David Henry Hwang.
Yes.
And show us what you got.
Yeah, so as Davidson said, this is my design for Soft Power, a play with a musical. Play and lyrics by David Henry Hwang, music and additional lyrics by Janita Sori. This is my final project for my third year at school, and I was very much drawn to the piece. Quick summary of the piece is that it is work that was inspired by a hate crime that happened towards David Henry Hwang. And through the show, I think a lot of the reasons as to why he wrote the piece is within it. But ultimately, it's also tied into the existence of The King and I and the presence of the Asian and the Asian American experience in the American musical theater. which is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and what has led me to want to do this piece. Going into the plot of it a little bit, we start off with a play, and we are with a character named DHH, David Henry Hwang, and we see him meet Shui Sheng and Zoe, and in one of the scenes in the play, they attend the opening night of The King and I, which also happens to be where there is an event with Hillary Clinton as she is running for president. So we're in 2016. And within there, already we're introducing the dynamic of the existence of this big thing over American musical theater, The King and I, the Rodgers and Hammerstein of it all, the Lincoln Center of it all. And ironically, my professor also designed that King and I. And the musical that kind of happens as a fever dream to him getting stabbed in the hate crime, he was stabbed in the back, and I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has this fever dream of what if there was a reverse King and I, and we have a Chinese man come into America and give suggestions as to how to run the country in the way that Anna in The King and I comes in, and King and I. And but in this version of the musical, we have Hillary Clinton as the king, as she is running for president in the 2016 election. And we actually get through to the election, and in the second act, we are in a world in where Hillary Clinton is not president. So going back through all of that, starting with my research, I did start with thinking about the history of Asian American, or the view of Asian identity in the American theater lens. And we have shows like The King and I, South Pacific, Miss Saigon, Thoroughly Modern Millie as like examples of how musical theater has kind of shaped the image of the Asian identity, even with shows like Anything Goes, where there is a level of caricature and
Racism.
Racism, thank you. Come on, yes. Trying to put it like and like even looking into like the Miss Saigon of it all, as I like to summarize it, and in the London production, the original production of Miss Saigon, Jonathan Pryce actually wore eye prosthetics to make himself look more Asian, and I believe that was cut in the New York version when it first transferred. But it's all of these like tiny tidbits of like, it's always been white voices telling the story of telling Asian stories, even with Madame Butterfly and Turandot. The list goes on. So I started with that, and thinking about my experiences and my love of musical theater, despite what musical theater has like, the impact that it has created to the public who has seen these shows. What is my point of view in this? There is a very clear vision of what, in a way that when people design shows from a foreign land, there is a lens in which people design through. And so it was a really great experience for me to think about myself as an immigrant who has spent the first decade of my life thinking about the idea of America, and then coming into America and like learning what America is, and what the reality of it is, and what it is in 2022, what it was in 2016, and what it will be, hopefully. I don't know, we'll see. And so all of that. Then looking into like real places that are the locations in the show, looking at, this was the old McDonald's in Times Square that no longer exists, but big glowing marquee. I was looking at, through Google Maps, the corner in where the hate crime actually happened. But starting from there, I decided to just go through, what does the show look like? Let me just roughly storyboard what I think each scene, what the impulses are. And my impulse for the play was always to set it in a void, and like really embracing the idea of we're in the theater and we're like, this is the part of the show that isn't light. This isn't the musical aspect of it. And so there is kind of like a grit, there's a darkness to it. And so my impulse was always to make the play a much darker space and putting in like a void of some sort. Then we went to various locations, and this was a really great exercise in trying to find where I wanted to go because I didn't know where I was going. And in the last scene where they sing about democracy, I all of a sudden like did this thing with a portal, and there was a silhouette of stars in the back, and the deck lit up to be like the 13 stripes of a flag. And it was a black and white flag. And originally I was also ambitiously wanting to do costumes for all of this, and then it's a lot to do for one person for a theoretical project. So, but at that point, I don't know if I was hitting like the nail too hard on the head with this gesture, but it is an all-Asian cast on this black and white America, and I wanted the image of everyone in monotone, like monotonous costumes in shades of yellow in this black and white space. That was the like where, that was the goal, that was where I was headed. And then it felt like everything else was kind of not where that was. So I worked backwards from this moment, and I still knowing what the play wanted to be, and finding the musical through this lens and how like I got there. And going back into like the musical, I guess let me go back for a second and say that there's three main things that I wanted to achieve. What does the play look like? What does the musical look like? And what does the musical look like after Hillary loses the election? Those were the three looks that I wanted to hit. Thinking also about traditional musical set design, and using portals as a way to transport and like kind of tell this story. And so I knew I was doing portals. I knew I had to hit those three things. I knew what the play was going to look like, and starting to design what the scenes were. Thinking about like the way that the graphicness of like scenery versus reality, and trying to channel that, and then thinking about how do I incorporate this like world of excess, and thinking about like the Trump half of the play. And I actually was looking for different gold textures, thinking about gold being a representation of this like existence. And I found this, I believe it was a Vanity Fair photo shoot of the cast of Crazy Rich Asians. And it was this picture of Constance Wu biting a gold brick. And this like all gold scenery. And so this was when I was like, oh, gold, okay, we're going there. And it's really hard to like look back on all of this. I really just went and just threw things onto the model box.
Is it hard because you feel like you've come a long way from it? Or is it hard because it's like it was a long time ago, and why is it hard?
I think it's hard to, everything has kind of like, it's like a bracket map, and where like one thing has kind of led to two things to like so much. And so like, if we're just talking about this one image, I can think more linearly as to like how I got there.
Yeah.
But then thinking about, and this is the first time I've like presented this piece as a whole, in its entirety. So like actually thinking about how do I answer and explain everything is the hard part, and because it's the mass of it is crazy.
And can I make an observation? I want you to keep talking, but I also think like you don't. One of the reasons I wanted you to pin these up on the wall when I looked at them was like this. You don't need to. This explains it.
Yeah.
And I have some questions and I have some thoughts, but I also feel like one of the things that's really beautiful about what you've done is, first of all, you don't need to explain anything, right? Like plays aren't book reports. Plays aren't a thing that you need to answer. Plays are a place to ask questions. But I also think what I think is so moving about what you've done is that I think it tells the story. You've done your job. You've told the story, which is really beautiful. I just want to commend you for that. I don't mean to cut you off in the middle at all, but I just think like it's hard because you've done it already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Walk us through the storyboards.
Yeah.
Just, I think part of the difficulty of this musical, or this play with a musical in it, I mean, because it comes with so much, it comes with footnotes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think as a piece, and I would, sort of, it has a tendency to be unwieldy, right? Because it's so, in terms of scope and just ambition, it's big, right? Because you're trying to interpret America, institutions like America, the American musical, and all of it, right? And I think for me, part of the challenge here, it's not even like, I don't think like the rubric of like what we think design is and what this is, I don't know if it applies here, right? Like I think for me, it's not about is it coherent? Is it cohesive? Is it blah blah? It's really, for me, it's tracking the thought process of David.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that? And he writes this, through a fever dream. So already, you're having to sift through that kind of muck, right? And to me, it's like, what is the direct way for us to experience the piece that David and Janine wrote, and deliver the thing, the physical worlds, that they're talking about. So let's go through it. I actually, yeah.
Sure. So when people walk into the theater, they see this black drop. There's a bit of the deck extended over the orchestra, and the orchestra pit is covered. We have the street lamp of the corner of Lafayette and South Portland.
Right.
And that's just kind of like where we're at. We start the show, and DHH shows up, and we're under this street lamp. And in the play, in the beginning, we have these three main locations that we go back and forth with them.
Right.
We have the entertainment group office.
Right.
That is just, we have a desk and a chair. And then we go into the Lincoln Center theater opening night, and we have a neon sign of the King.
That's where they first meet Hillary Clinton.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go through here, and we wake up, and we're in a musical. The overture begins, he gets stabbed, and the cover over the orchestra tracks open, and the conductor pops up from the orchestra, and we're transported. I guess on a more technical sense, there's the three portals are kind of layered on top of each other, and they all kind of iris out, with the play being just a black portal. We open up and we have this like crushed red with gold leaf frames, and we have the title of the show in Chinese. We go into the McDonald's nightclub, and at Hillary's campaign rally, we're here, and then we go into election night, back at the office, and in this moment, so this is when we find out that Hillary loses the election, and there's this mob of people ready to attack from the outside, and so the glass of the office is this like scrim material, and so there's we see the people through, and it's a kabuki drop that falls in, and so they walk through the walls and attack the office, leaving DHH on the ground, or I guess in this musical, David, on the ground stabbed, and he sings "I Am," and that's where we end the first act. A part of this like transition from here to the second half of the show, of the musical, is that the red portal irises open, and we reveal that like these portals, it's like we're revealing the gold that's behind it the whole time.
Right. What does the reveal of the gold mean, sort of like aesthetically? Like,
yeah, so for me, the gold was a like Trump Tower gold was like where I was heading with that. And I think that with thinking about red and gold being a very Chinese color palette, but also very much the like
Trump colors. Yeah.
So that's where the gold comes from for me. Then we go into the White House, and musically it is this like rodeo number, and so this like Western saloon style. We have a version of the Oval Office. We've got gold leafed guns on the wall. We have some barrels.
Yeah. I think it's also very important to actually name that a lot of like the settings here are, it's convoluted, right? Like, it's imagined through a foreigner's lens of what America would be.
It's
right?
the sort of, it's what we did to Siam in the
exactly.
Yes.
It's like, oh, and then this thing's here.
And then let's put
like
some gold
like
nails on these. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's sort of like the
They've done that to America.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simplifying what the American symbols are. And so you see the collision of symbols here as Miguel has placed, you know.
And that is a much better way of saying what I took 3,000
No,
minutes to say.
no. It's really good because I think part of the layering of the storytelling of this particular piece is tricky. Yeah.
And so we're in the White House, and this is kind of where I started to backtrack from when I like discovered that original image of the end of the show. And so we're inside, and then this wall flies out, and behind it are like the West Wing colonnade. And so this is where they're in the exterior of the White House. We have Hillary sing her song about democracy here. Then the show ends with her, and before the number ends, the red portals come back. And that was the last minute gesture that I was discovering through storyboarding, that I was like, maybe I'll throw this in. And this is when she gets arrested and the musical ends.
Right.
Then we go back, we wake up with David in the hospital, and we're back in the world of the play. Going out of this moment, he sings the reprise of the same song that Hillary sings, and we're in this black and white world of America. And yeah, that's the whole.
I mean, it's so enormous.
Yeah.
It's so.
Clint and I both wrestled with this bear.
Yeah. So David and I actually have a history with this piece. So it's very exciting to see this.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I have two thoughts, and I know you're at a really tender place. You're like heading towards the end of your third year, and this is almost done. It's a beautiful project. My two thoughts, just observationally, the thing you described to me, to all of us at the end, with black, white stripes, people in yellow, like the bare starkness of that. I feel like you neatened that up a little bit. I feel like this picture doesn't have the power of the thing that you described to me.
Yeah.
And I miss that because the thing you described to me seems fucking cool.
Yeah.
And pardon the language. And this is beautiful, but it's like, it just feels like you neatened it up a little. And part of that is just a technical thing, and I do this sometimes too, and I think about it, right? When I'm cropping model photographs, sometimes, you like have to put the thing in, you blah, 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 and then you're like, ooh, this doesn't feel the way that I want it to feel, so I just crop a little closer to make the thing bigger. So partly I feel like it's like, it could be more exciting, it could feel more exciting if it was, I just was sensing it more. But also I feel like, where are my stripes on the floor? Like, where is the because that is such what's so beautiful to me about the end of, and so moving about the end of Soft Power is I'm gonna say a bad word again, it's a fuck you, but it's also it's also hopeful. And it is both of those things, that whole piece is both of those things. And I think it is incredible that they made a piece that holds both of those things together. It is such a fuck you to America, and also hope. And it just feels a little neater.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think part of it is that, so the way that I was imagining the stripes is that they're, not to be super technical about it, but they're like LED tapes that have just been on the ground for like the entire thing, and they just glow for that final moment. And I think that like it's a lot clearer in the other photos, but it's not like, that was one thing that I feel like is like a Photoshop moment where I think having that and adding that would definitely allow that
I
pop
think that's
and that.
the reason that I harp on it is because I think it's the key to the design. You start really strong, and I want to end as strong as that. My other observation, just also even looking just from here, what I can see about the everything in that kind of research picture. All the yellow gold stuff feels a little bit like how David is remembering this thing, a little bit like a fever dream, right? Constance Wu is like eating the thing, and there's a crazy gold thing, and blah blah, it's a gold toilet, and blah blah blah. And again, I just observe that I feel like you just neatened it up a little, and it's a fever dream, right? It's David dreaming this musical on what he thinks is his deathbed. Thankfully, wasn't. And I just encourage you, especially because you have the impulse, and I see the impulse in the research, to just lean into make the preceding amount of toilets, have a picture of somebody eating bricks, if that excites you, and if that's not what you want to do, don't do it. But because I see it there, I'm like, ooh, yeah, Trump's America is crazy. And I want to feel it in these pictures, because this is where you're gonna, I don't mean to use the word sell because it's so gross, but this is where you're gonna inspire your collaborators to make other exciting choices. You're gonna inspire your choreographer to be like, cool, we need to get 24 bricks that everybody's gonna eat in the thing, or cool, we need 40 toilets because everybody's gonna run around in the toilets, or those are the things that inspire people. And these are a tool to do that. And so I encourage you to lean into that stuff because you see it. You find it and you respond to it. And I want to feel it. I want to feel it in here because they're all very exciting ideas.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about, I don't know how to formulate this question, but those urges to do the wild choice and the wild card approach, and how thinking about the text being the text and the music being the music, how can you find places to activate those? Because I think that there is the neatness, I think, is probably a personal thing for me in the way my mind works, but also wanting to push the boundaries of the way my mind works. How does one discover places to play with that, if we're thinking in just the second act of the musical, I'm trying to find or thinking of places in where what is exaggerated that I can then
I'll identify. I mean, I think that question is personal. I also think our job partly is to neaten things up, right? We dramaturg things, and so partly our job is to be okay, I'm going to take all these things, I'm going to take all these locations, and I'm going to put it into one location. So it's a good impulse to have. That's partly our job. But I guess I feel for instance, when we go to the White House, and you've already got guns all over the wall. Now I'm going to say a bunch of insane things, but why can't everybody be eating shit out of a golden toilet? Why can't everybody be why aren't there 40 dead bodies all covered in gold with blood dripping down them? Why? That's a scene where you could you've started to lean into it, right? It doesn't really make sense in the Golden Gate Bridge thing because that's lovely and romantic and is a kind of Astaire and Rogers number, but the White House is a place where that's unleashed, right? So lean into those, find those places, and invent those places. And you can always start those conversations with, this is maybe a crazy idea, but people can always say, yeah, that's too crazy. And then, we do, I'm not sure, I have this relationship with some directors where there's a fun dare, right? You send them a picture and you're well, couldn't we just do it like this? Right. Well, couldn't this person just wear this? Right. And part of it's fun, right? But part of it is also yeah.
Can you figure out a way?
Yeah, and also it's also you can do anything. Yeah, right.
No,
to file the text.
It's
totally.
What David is saying is so inspirational, because I, like you, when I approached this musical, was really how do I contain it, right? Like, how do I, and I think one of the things that I wrestled with was the idea of ownership, right? Like, who owns it? And when we walk in, is it an identifiably Asian space, right? Like, and I remember, I think part of, for me, how the trajectory of designing this was, if it is inherently an Asian space, when do we go fag, full Asian glory, and then when do we sort of pull out, right, of that? And and I think part of, for me, part of like what's really, I mean, your design is handsome, right? Like if a producer sees this, it's pretty and it's handsome, but I think one of the things that it may not exhibit itself as physical messiness, but finding a discordance in the design, I think may be what could be beneficial or helpful, right? Like, I think just looking at different things, right? For instance, I think here, in the idea of the airplane was that it was supposed to mimic or sort of turn it on its head, the idea of Anna arriving in Siam in that giant boat, right? Like, and I just wonder if this becomes just, how does it, how we know what the source is, we know how it's been turned, then how do we make it, like, what is the next step? Mm-hmm. Is it commenting on it? Is it saying, oh, it's utterly gross, right? And how do we say that, right? And I think that's sort of, I think those are just the things that I keep on thinking about this piece. And I think what's pleasurable about this class right now is that, we've both done this piece, but it's also just like, oh God, like how, just realizing the things that the piece, it is like, the piece is like this hungry monster that just like wants more and more and more, right? Like, and it wants more. It wants to be bitten in more, mm-hmm. right? And I think part of it too is that, for me, particularly as an Asian American designer, it's like, how do you actually really turn this on its head, right? And like, what is the sense of ownership here, right? And is the idea of like Chinese people putting up an American musical and them getting it wrong, is that enough? Mm. Is that, I mean, do they get it wrong? Like, you know what I mean? Like, do they do the same mistakes as white people do? Yeah. And I ask these questions, like, what if they got it right? What if they actually got it right? Like, the way, we didn't get it right with King and I. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so I think this particular piece, for me, I mean, it's you. I think there are so many things that like give me hope, right? Like, I think that the sort of the void is exciting.
It's a great achievement.
It's a monster piece. I mean,
it is. It's and you've given it a really beautiful landscape, and I think we're just feeling there's some potential in there to lean one way or the other. If you're going to lean to musical, like High School Musical, then make it stupider, right? Make it even stupider. Make the musical parts even dumber, or make them messier, or just push yourself a little in a direction. Mm-hmm. You can solve a problem, and I think you've solved this problem really beautifully. Beautifully. And I just feel like you've lost a little bit of your research in the solving of the problem. And that's something that we deal with all the time, right? Which is like, oh, I got to the end, like, who was I at the beginning? And that's, keeping that alive is part of the journey.
Mm. Yeah. But wow.
Yeah, big wow.
It is a giant piece. Yeah. Hi, we have Zhang Yu from Carnegie Mellon University, costume designer, MFA, third year?
Yeah.
Third year, to show us his stuff. Hi.
Hello. What I'm going to share with you is my
design of Natasha Pierre and Great Comic 1812, which was recently opened in Chelsea Theater at Carnegie Mellon University. And this is my design. So at the very beginning of my research and design, I realized that this production has a very mixed style in either performing, acting, and also in all the visual apartment. Not only because the opera is a big thing with all the actors and the characters on the stage all the time, but also that was the moment that the hidden context, a bigger story, can be shown to the audience at that moment. So we use that scene as a start point, as a thematic point for all our design. So my design for the opera scene is that as a response to the scenic design, this is some of the reference of the scenic part. The designer used a lot of like burgundy colored curtain, and lighting is also in the gold tone. So as to collaborate with this idea, I put all the characters, which are the nobilities, in repeated gold and in the warm and the red tone to show the lifestyle of the aristocratic at that time, to make the thing look very luxury and very sparkling in a way. I used for the principal characters, I adapt more period silhouette and shape for those characters, but use contemporary material and the texture to create this character. When the opera starts, there is a sharp contrast, and this is how I was trying to bring the hidden story of the entire novel, The War and Peace, to the audience, because I believe audiences are smart. Many of them have read this novel, and they know the bigger story, which the production is based on. Basically, Natasha Pierre is just 2 chapters, a couple pages from this grand epic, but there is a bigger story hidden from our production, and it's important because the novel is not just because Natasha and Pierre and their love affair. It's about a time for all the nobility. They're living in their last moment of their best life, and the whole stage of aristocracy is going to break down and collapse. And all the nobility, they either ignore that the war which was happening, the French army has already crossed the border and come to Moscow, but they're still having parties, they go to the opera, and our main character, Natasha, was just too young and innocent to be bothered with the world outside herself. So this is the moment that I talked with my director, that this is the very important moment that we can bring this bigger context to the audience. So I create this very sharp idea, the contrast for the opera performance to the main characters, put them in a very dismal, cold tone and a very dark feeling. So this is the picture that I used as the main inspiration from Guernica, from Picasso. What was the opera about? What the dancing is about? What's the story behind this? So I was holding this design to let him to tell me what the dancing is about.
Smart.
And and he eventually tell me, how about this? Let's make a design for the opera singers just to represent war and peace. Very abstract idea. So when I received this idea, I quickly pulled off like inspiration pictures and made this design. So these are the inspirations for the piece. I borrowed the shape from the Russian doll and the more curvy line, round line, to and create more balanced shape for the piece. Let's go next. So this is my design for the opera singers and the opera ballet dancers. And
this happened, right? Like you.
Yeah, it's on stage now.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah, we opened it on April 15th.
Oh wow!
And it will run for 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah.
And this is the design for the piece. So she has a more symmetrical shape and more rounded and gentle and balanced shape. And this is the design for the war. And this is one of the character, Anatole. This is the look when he enters the opera, and when he, Natasha was so attracted by this handsome guy. So the scenic design is also like it's part of it looks like an opera house, and part is like a contemporary, like a concert location. So I hope that when Anatole enters the scene, he should look like a rock star. So I got inspired by this motorcycle jacket, and then I just transferred this to a more period shape and into a tailcoat. Blaga is a low-class person, and he is like a Russian hunter. And I mixed or like give the idea of mixing the street style, like the one that you will probably see on the New York street with all the pins and the badges and even handwriting on his garment, and then combined with some very authentic Russian hunt texture and elements to create this character, something like a halo. They also use more modern material and details to show my feeling towards this actress. I added slit on this dress, so when she walks, she can show her boots and the stockings in a way to give them like she's really charming and also sexy in a way. And so this is kind of like the way that I bring different elements together. So I use different ways for different characters to make that happen. The other important of the design is the ensembles and the backgrounds. This is a show that has a big ensemble members. I actually started to design the ensembles before I start to design the main principals, because they are the people who create the word of the story, and they which commentated the story for the principal characters, and also they are the people who make all the transition happen for the story. So the first decision I made for my design was that I'm gonna start designing the ensemble first.
Great. Yeah,
because I had a very decent budget for that, but even with that, for this big production, I really need to be smart about how to balance my need of using this budget. So we ended up not building anything for the ensembles, just using rentals and pulling anything possible to create this world. So I did the polling and the rental first, and that was a lot. And I matched everything on the form to look at what color, what fabric, what text I have in hand, so I will know the word is going to happen for me to design the main the principal roles. So I also told all the ensemble characters, if your ensemble, remember you're very important because you are making this story happen. So for some of the same, I will take away or add some layers to them to create a different style or color tone or atmosphere for different needs of different scene. So for the opera, I add sash, which decorate with all the sparkling brooches and the jewelries to support the luxury feeling of that moment. The later scene, which is a ball, when Natasha fully fall in love with Anatole. I believe that was a very romantic and a very sexy scene. So I put all the colors in just black and and the red, and asking all of them to take off the jacket or put on some accessories to achieve that very specific color tone for that moment.
Can we go back to, just scroll me back a couple slides? Keep on scrolling. Keep one more. Yep. Nope. That guy. So I had this question also with Paloma's design, which was so beautiful for the original, which is it's like there's a white dress, there's a white dress, there's kind of a white dress, there's a white dress. And it's Carrie Robbins told me this at school, and it's always echoed, but I think it's, for me, it's good advice, which is if you're gonna go to the trouble to have somebody change their costume, right? If you're gonna tell the story about, you saw me in a white dress, and now I'm gonna change. And it's just a question. Is the strongest next choice another white dress? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it, if you're gonna go to the trouble to like, I am a character who's experiencing a bunch of things, is me staying in essentially the same palette all the way through, telling the story of my transformation or my lack of transformation during the show? And maybe it is, but it's the thing that I remember thinking when I saw the musical with Paloma. Again, it was a beautiful design, but I was like, oh, another white dress, and another white dress. Like, are you spending your money in the smartest way, and just a kind of, in a sort of basic budgetary way, but also are you telling the biggest story about that character's journey if those things hew too closely to each other, if that makes sense.
I actually made a decision for Natasha to be mainly in white specifically, because when I constructed the opera scene, the biggest construct was the nobility and opera.
Yep.
But I also want to create a slightly smaller contrast with Natasha and or other main principals to put her aura in white, so she can show that she's really young and innocent. So I used the white for Natasha as a principal color for the design, and add some detail and slightly colored for the more casual look of her.
I just asked the question.
I think it's a really good question because I experienced the same thing that you did, right? Like, but here's the thing too. First of all, bravo. Giant piece, like Miguel's piece. Like, this is a costume extravaganza, right? Like, I remember talking to Paloma, and Paloma actually used those two words, costume extravaganza, and it was. And I think part of what in the decision, let's just stick with the Natasha white dress, right? And she's the girl in white. Let's just say she's the girl in white, right? And there's something really iconic about that. For me, then is it about silhouette, right? Because the piece itself it is based on history, right? But there's so many layers, like you're actually mixing modern stuff, right? So is the first white dress, different from the second?
A baby doll dress.
Right, is it, are the sleeves, like, you know what I mean? Like, do we, there is in sort of like in designing costumes, there is like, oh, here's the reality of the sort of time change, right? But there's also, I always say that it's not only costume 1 and costume 2. It's changing from costume 1 to costume 2. That's really important. That journey is actually really important. And for me, if you're gonna do a change, show me a change. Show me a journey, right? Like, show me like something from a journey for a point, right? Like, and I think that's sort of what's important about costume changes. Again, I spoke about this, right? Like, it's such an opportunity for theatricality, and it's such an opportunity not only for storytelling, but actually for like, oh, she's okay. Look at her. You know what I mean? Like, I think that to me is like, it's such an opportunity to actually create an emotional reaction. You know what I mean? Yeah.
The other question I have, and now I want to go see your production. Your drawings are so beautiful and descriptive and all of those wonderful things. And you draw with such a lightness. You have a sort of, I don't know if you use watercolors, but it has a kind of watercolor vibe. There's a lot of layers in how you paint. I assume it's paint. I don't know how you're doing it, but do you draw on the computer or do you draw on the?
Is it gouache?
I'm using acrylic actually.
Oh, acrylic,
yeah,
wow.
I use very mixed medium for that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I usually do watercolor a lot, but since this is a big show, I need to do a lot of rendering.
Yeah.
And watercolors turn out to be too time consuming. I need to put a lot of layers to that. So I think I'm gonna just use the easier.
Yeah.
It's great. What's beautiful about how you paint is that and this is true in some of your other things that I've seen, which we won't see tonight, but maybe we can flash up on the screen. But there, you draw so much. There's so much depth in layer in the fabrics, and the reason that I'm bringing it up is because what I want to see is how you translate that into the actual garment, right? Susan Sue always said, right, if you draw, however you draw, this is really true, it's true with scenery too. Listen to your hand, even if you don't draw people very well, even if you don't draw, like your hand is telling you something, right? Your paint is telling you something. Ooh, that's a cream with a little bit of like green on the side and a little bit of this thing. And that might have just been something you painted, or sometimes when you collage something, you get a little bit of another color into the middle of something. Pay attention to that and bring that to bring that to the thing you make, especially because you do paint super well and you paint with all this depth. My hope is that when I look at those clothes, you have found a way through painting or layering or whatever to bring that depth to the costume you've made.
Agreed. Yeah. I also feel like, I think one of the things that is important to note, right? Like these costumes are actually behind mostly a red thing, a red field, right? Or a darker field. And I think, what I love about what you've done is that you've, it's always, we're like in design school, we're always taught, your figures need to be 8 heads high, right, or something like that. But I actually love aspirational painting, like renderings, like because you actually, for me, what you're drawing is like, I want it to look this way. Right? Like it may not end up that way, but I think there's something to designing aspirational that's really great. I love I love the attitude that they have, right? Like there is a confidence to the way you're drawing them, but which to me I hope, because I haven't seen the production, right, which hopefully translates to the production. It also gives us a sort of a roadmap as an actor, like how I'm supposed to actually carry myself here. I especially love this too. I love this is a very Carrie Robbins sketch. But I love the layering here. I love the care that you're taking, right? And to me, I think one of the things that I have a question about is like, is the tension intentional, or is the tension just like accidental? But yeah, it's great. Well, can we scroll down a little bit more? Yeah, keep on going, keep on going, keep on. Okay, let's stop at Anatoly for instance. I love this, right? Like I think that is gorgeous, and then that I imagine that's all Swarovski's. Like yeah. It makes me then wonder, like how do you maintain that energy? Not the energy of his costume, but the energy of his costume arriving on stage, right? Like, and that's sort of one of the things that's really important too, because those are like ephemeral things in costume design, right? Like I think one of the things that doesn't get unpacked a lot is what is the design elements of like pacing and time and all of this kind of stuff, right? Like we're always so focused on the material things, but we're actually not focusing on like, how are we delivering the effects? Are we sustaining it? Am I just like,
What do you mean by that?
Like for instance, I think, we think of design elements as like, really like color and shape, For me, like time is a design element, right? Like and impact is a design element, and how would we pacing that, right? Like so, for instance, if you have a costume like this arriving, when is the next hit? think of me as like somebody who's consuming something, right? Like, when is the next hit? When am I experiencing another piece of Nirvana? Are you going to make me wait for it? You know what I mean? Are you going to... It may not be in the text, but you have an opportunity to actually play with my feelings, you know?
The other thing that I'm just, and I feel this way, I felt this way a little bit about Miguel. I mean, I always feel this way. I feel this way in my own work too, right? Which is, what's incredible about this jacket is the sleeves are too long, right? So there's already a that kind of vibe, which you sort of get here, but there's also the like hanging right of the Balmain coat, like hanging on the shoulder. So already in both of these pieces of research, you have like a sleeve is too long, things on a shoulder. There's just like a kind of like a sexy sort of like rock and roll vibe that I feel like you neatened up a little bit. And there's another. Go back to one. That direction I think. One more. Oh yeah, no this. Right? The craziness of this is McQueen, right? But this there's McQueen, I saw some of the Galliano things too, which is like the thing that sort of, it's not neat, and it's got a little bit of swagger, and you found that in the research, and I feel like you neaten it up in the sketch a little bit, and I feel like just do the research. And sometimes, I know this about the way that I draw okay, but because of how I draw, I have to neaten it up because it's just like hard to draw the weird thing. And so sometimes I just collage it so that I keep the energy of the research alive, and I communicate that energy not only to the actor and the director, but also the shot, right? Yeah. So you're finding cool research, and then I feel you just like stepping back from it a little bit. Maybe you don't mean that, but you're showing it to me, and so I'm like, ooh, I want that crazy thing. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's so great. And sometimes, Zhang Yu, I think part of it is like, if you want that, you don't need to sketch it. You just need to say, I want that. I think what you found in the research is really, really important. Because sometimes we're like, why am I so attracted to this, right? But like that what David had pointed out, and even the girl right next to that girl, and that jacket, that pointy jacket with all the studs, it is privilege.
Right.
That is privilege. I am so privileged I could do this to my jacket. I act like it's normal. That to me that is literal what aristocracy is. I will do something and you will accept it as art. Like that is haute couture. Look at you know what I mean? Like, I think to me that's what you found in the research. That maybe like I yearn for it in the sketches, in the ultimate thing. But major work. Yeah. Bravo. Yeah.
Agreed. One of the things, I just will make a quick observation, which is, I hope this was helpful or useful. It's beautiful to share space with a bunch of other designers, especially designers that we don't know. Yeah. Wonderful. Now you guys are a community, which is really great. You're part of our community, which is really great. But also this, I mean, in some ways I'm like, well, I hope you got something out of it. But I did. I did too. It's so inspiring to see your work, to see anybody, just to spend time in the brain of another designer is a real privilege. Yeah. It's a real thrill. And you guys brought incredible work and questions and community, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, and it's all just, it's all point of view, right? Yeah. Like, I don't think anything that we said or, is the right way. It might have been all, like, wrong for you, but, like, I think it's really just about point of view and never losing sight of what you believe in firmly, and so thank you, and bravo on all this, like, gorgeous, beautiful work.
Yeah, incredible.